Up next in the broadcast, officials announced the biggest spending bump to the annual government budget since the 2008 financial crisis in a bid to get the nation's growth rate back. Preparations are underway for President Park's debut at the United Nations next week, where she will work to garner international support for unification of the Korean Peninsula. And it's the day of reckoning for Scotland as polls open for voters to decide whether it will pull away from the United Kingdom to become its own independent nation. Primetime News begins now. Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks for joining us tonight. The Korean government has laid out the budget for next year, raising the spending plan by the largest amount since the global financial crisis in 2008.
Officials say their expansionary policies are essential to pull the economy out of a low-growth trap. Our Hwang Ji-hye explains how that would work.
The Korean government on Thursday unveiled its biggest spending increase in 7 years for 2015, underlining its determination to get the nation's economy back on a normal growth track. In its new budget proposal, the finance ministry said it will raise spending by 5.7% from this year to 376 trillion won, or roughly $360 billion US dollars.
We raised spending by about $7.5 billion from our original plan. That's a massive rise considering the government's additional spending plans usually hovered around the $5 to $6 billion level in the past.
More than 30% of the 2015 budget will be spent on creating more jobs and improving welfare. It also calls for increasing expenditures in safety-related government projects like an overall inspection of safety facilities. The government aims to prevent large-scale accidents and disasters like April's ferry sinking from happening again. The proposal calls for a $32 billion budget deficit, which would represent 2.1% of the nation's GDP. But the ministry says by breathing fresh life into the sputtering economic recovery, the country would achieve fiscal balance within a few years.
The increased expenditure will result in a virtuous cycle, as it will lead to more income and robust business activities that will, in turn, generate greater tax revenues.
Korea's debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to inch up next year from this year, but the government says it still reflects Korea's relatively sound fiscal health. It says the mid-30% range is still much lower than the OECD average of around 110%. The increased spending plan is projected to help the economy grow by 4% next year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And another plan laid out this time by the Agriculture Ministry is fueling anger among the country's farmers. The Korean government announced today it has set the tariff rate for imported rice, paving the way for Korea's rice market to open up starting next year. Kim Young-gil has more.
The Korean government has set its tariff on rice imports at 513%. The Agriculture Ministry said the high tariff will help protect Korea's rice industry as imported rice will be more expensive.
We have prepared measures such as stabilizing the income of rice farmers, modernizing the rice farming industry, and promoting the consumption of rice.
Lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party also said imposing high tariffs was the only answer to help locally produced rice compete with the influx of imported rice on the market. The move comes as the country is set to liberalize its rice market from next year. However, farmers and civic groups oppose the move, saying it will hurt their livelihoods and the local rice market.
The government unilaterally declared a tariff rate without even discussing it with the farmers or the public. The whole process was done in secret.
The ministry said the proposed tariff rate will be submitted to the World Trade Organization before the end of this month. If the rate is confirmed by the WTO, the proposed tariff will go into effect on January 1st of 2015. However, it could be months until the process is finalized, while the WTO assesses whether the tariff rate proposed by Korea is appropriate. Korea had been allowed to delay the opening of its rice market under a WTO quota agreement in 1993 in exchange for gradually increasing its mandatory import quota, which reached more than 400,000 tons this year. The agreement with the WTO requires Korea to continue importing the mandatory quota even after the market is opened next year at a 5% tariff rate. The government could not afford to further postpone the opening of the rice market, nor had a reason to do so, as the country's rice consumption continues to drop. Chimyeong-git, Arirang News.
The main opposition party, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, has picked five-term lawmaker Moon Hee-sang to head the party's emergency committee starting Friday. As a newly elected head, Mr. Moon will bear the responsibility of putting an end to in-house squabbling and prepare for the party's convention to select a new leader early next year. Interim chief Park Young-sun had been heading this committee since co-chairs An Cheol-soo and Kim Han-gil stepped down over the party's by-election defeat in July.
President Park Geun-hye will be making her diplomatic debut at the United Nations next week, addressing the General Assembly for the first time since taking office early last year.
And that speech is expected to center around Seoul's diplomatic efforts to restore peace and stability on the peninsula. She's also highlighting Korea's role in countering global issues such as climate change and terrorism.
And for more, we're now joined by our presidential office correspondent, Chae Yu-sun. Thanks for joining us. I understand you're going to be following the president on her trip.
Right. Well, let's first talk about her UN General Assembly address. While officials are still working on that speech, it's widely expected to contain her vision for a unification on the peninsula and also seek international support behind that plan. Now, back in March, the South Korean leader proposed that the two Koreas increase Seoul's humanitarian support to Pyongyang and people-to-people exchanges as an initial step towards preparing for reunification. She has even launched a committee here in the South to get ready for the unprecedented process. President Park will also likely talk about rebuilding inter-Korean trust to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue and to bring peace and prosperity to Northeast Asia and Eurasia. It's also possible she might say something about the North's human rights abuses.
And speaking of North Korea, its Foreign Minister Lee Soo-hyung is going to be there. It's pretty rare, I would say. What can we expect from him?
Well, Lee, Pyongyang's highest-ranking official to attend the assembly in 15 years, is likely to defend his country's nuclear and missile programs as well as its human rights record. Although officials from the two Koreas don't have plans right now to meet on the sidelines at the UN, President Park had said the door to engaging with the North in New York was open. But it's the North's human rights issue that will garner the most attention. For the first time, a ministerial-level meeting on the subject will be held on the sidelines of the assembly, where top diplomats from South Korea and the U.S. will speak strongly about the gravity of the abuses that are taking place in the North. And this comes after the UN Commission of Inquiry released a report on North Korean human rights earlier this year. And as Pyongyang continues to hold 3 Americans who are accused of violating North Korean law. North Korea contests the international community's condemnations, and its foreign minister is expected to rebut the claims in his address to the assembly.
Well, speaking of high-level meetings, Japan is another country where relations are strained between the top officials of both countries. And we heard some reports earlier this week that there may be a meeting between President Park and Shinzo Abe for the first time, where the two of them were just alone together. What's the real story behind that?
Well, Korea's presidential office has denied that report and even said that the idea of such a summit was not even under consideration. Citing an unnamed source, a local broadcaster reported that the two sides discussed President Park visiting Japan on her return from the UN, but that talks were later called off after Seoul determined that Tokyo's position on historical issues was not satisfactory. Earlier this week, President Park urged the Japanese leadership to make what she called a courageous decision to apologize to the victims of its wartime sex slavery and restore their honor. But there's still a possibility the two leaders could engage in talks at the UN.
And it's not just going to be about security issues and foreign policy issues. I mean, it's her debut at the UN General Assembly, so she's going to touch on other Korea's role potentially in terms of global issues, right?
Right. Addressing the UN Climate Summit on Tuesday, the president will introduce her government's efforts to build a growth engine out of the global problem by converging IT with culture and other sectors in a creative economy, spurring growth and expanding new jobs. At a high-level meeting on global education presided over by the UN Secretary General, President Park will speak about Korea's education system and vow to work to advance education worldwide ahead of next year's World Education Forum here in Korea. At the U.S.-led Security Council meeting on foreign terrorist fighters, a mounting issue of concern in the Middle East, President Park is expected to stress the need for international cooperation to counter the phenomenon of foreigners joining Islamist extremist groups. She will also announce ways that Korea is willing to help in global fight, likely in the form of humanitarian assistance.
All right, Yoo-sun, thank you very much, and have a safe trip with the president. And of course, we hope to see you back here very soon.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chery from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
A closely watched mega land deal in the affluent district of Gangnam in Seoul has gone to Hyundai Motor Group. The nation's top car maker made a $10 billion offer for one of the last remaining large plots of land available for development in the capital. The figure is 3 times the appraised price of the site and was large enough to outbid Samsung Electronics, which also wanted the space. The estate is nearly 80,000 square meters in size and is currently the headquarters of the state-run power company KEPCO. Hyundai Motor says it plans to build a global business center on the site. On today's announcement, shares of Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Motors fell 9% and 10% respectively, while KEPCO's went up 6%. A long string of reports in recent months have pointed to a considerable drop in private consumption here in Korea. Efforts to turn the tide have so far proven unsuccessful, and a new report blames household debt and insufficient youth employment. Our Connie Kim has more.
Increasing household debt and the lackluster youth employment rate are to blame for Korea's sluggish private consumption. That's the diagnosis by the Federation of Korean Industries in a recent report. The shrinking spending capacity of households was pinpointed as the biggest problem limiting consumption. The level of household debt last year stood at nearly $980 billion, which represents more than 70% of the nation's GDP. Now that's up about 20 percentage points from a decade ago. The increase in non-living expenditures such as taxes and insurance is also holding households back from spending. Non-living expenditures grew more than 70% last year from 10 years earlier, with household income increasing far less at less than 60%. Low youth employment was another troubling factor. While more than 400,000 new jobs were created last year, new positions for those in their 20s dropped by 80,000, while those for people in their 50s rose more than 200,000. Rising home rental prices, medical expenses, and difficulties in preparing for life after retirement were also cited in the report as reasons for Korea's sluggish private consumption. Officials at the Federation of Korean Industries say it's important to increase investment, which would generate employment and in turn lead to a boost in consumption. The Federation also called for measures that could induce corporate investment. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Korea has become one of the most visited countries by Chinese tourists, and with China's National Day holiday just around the corner, a record number of visitors are expected to fly across the West Sea. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
China's week-long National Day holiday kicks off on October 1st this year. Around 160,000 Chinese tourists are expected to flock to Seoul, up 35% from the same period a year ago. Nearly 8 million foreign tourists visited the country this year as of July, and about 3.4 million, or 4 in every 10 foreign visitors, were Chinese. And it's a trend that's likely to continue. The total number of Chinese visitors is expected to reach 5 million next month and 6 million by the end of the year. Will they open their wallets? Chinese people are much wealthier than they used to be, with their gross national income per capita standing at around $6,700 last year. And they aren't shy about spending while they're here either.
Chinese tourists tend to spend more during special occasions. In the case of the national holiday, they're expected to shell out nearly $3,000 each.
It's estimated that Chinese tourists will spend over $400 million during the holiday week alone. But the increased spending doesn't necessarily go into the pockets of Korea.
Many visitors arrange their visits through Chinese travel agencies or dwell in Chinese-operated hotels, so a significant portion of the profits actually go back to China.
He added that to prevent such a phenomenon, Korea needs to develop its tourism infrastructure, for instance by providing more language assistance and making it more convenient for Chinese tourists while they are here. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Voting in Scotland is underway in a landmark poll that will determine the fate of the country's future with the United Kingdom.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, the big question on everyone's mind is, should Scotland become an independent country?
Well, the decision marks an unprecedented moment in British politics, and both the yes and no camps are cutting it right down to the wire. Latest polls leading up to the referendum are too close to call, with undecided voters likely to swing the final result in either direction. Our Shin Se-min reports.
For what could be one of the most important decisions of their lives, it comes down to the simplest of choices: yes or no. Polls have opened across Scotland for some 4 million eligible voters who will decide on whether their country serves its 307-year union with the United Kingdom.
Yes, I'm happy with the decisions on that very well. And I'll go all the way. And if we get it tomorrow, I'll be a very happy man.
Definitely no, no, no. Because we're better as a team. A team always works better than an individual.
The latest poll released Wednesday showed a paper-thin lead for the No campaign at 51 to 49%, but it's far too close to call. The survey also showed as many as 600,000 Scots are still undecided about which way they'll vote.
I am still undecided. It's worrying, but it's such a huge decision to make, and we all need to take our vote very, very seriously, so I'm still really don't know what I'm going to do.
If Scotland decides to secede from Great Britain, there are a lot of unknowns. Will the newly independent country still have a future with the European Union? And there'll also be a critical decision to take on its currency. They'll also only have 18 months to arrange all the logistics. But if Scotland chooses to stay within the UK, the relations with the country will most likely be different, as British Prime Minister David Cameron has said London will grant Scotland more powers to govern itself. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And turning now to Washington, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed President Obama's plan to arm and train Syrian rebels in the fight against Islamic State militants. The operation, worth $500 million, is the latest step in the U.S.-led campaign to degrade and destroy IS, one that Obama said Wednesday will not include American ground troops.
The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight for their own country against these terrorists.
Obama emphasized that the U.S. would maintain a supporting role, saying it's the best way to secure peace in the region amid the brutality of the extremist group. And turning back to Asia, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has welcomed President Xi Jinping in a rare state visit aimed at strengthening ties between the world's two most populous countries. Both leaders are set to discuss economic deals worth tens of billions of dollars, as New Delhi hopes Beijing can provide a much-needed boost to its infrastructure and manufacturing products, while China seeks a closer ally amid tense regional affairs. The Chinese president's three-day visit to India represents the last leg of his Southeast Asia tour that included stops in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to sports. Now there's less than a day until the Asian Games officially begins, and with years of preparation culminating to that point, a grand opening ceremony will mark the occasion. Korean performers will bring the color and flair, but the lighting of the torch will be the climax of the show. Baseball star Lee Seung-yup, golfer Park In-bi, speed skater Lee Kyu-hyuk, and others will pass the torch along, eventually to a still undisclosed final torchbearer who will light the cauldron at Incheon Asiad Main Stadium. And with the games opening soon, the remaining nations filled up the athletes' village, including South and North Korea, who took part in separate flag-raising ceremonies. Now, the Quadrennial Games is a big deal with 36 sports being played. With so many events and athletes to watch, a poll asked Koreans who they wanted to see the most. And the jury has spoken. Rhythmic gymnast Son Yeon-jae earned over a quarter of the votes in the survey by Panel Marketing Interactive. Tickets to her events were the first to be sold out to back up those numbers. Meanwhile, swimmer Park Tae-hwan came in at a close second in the popularity poll. And we're all looking forward to the 17th Asiad in Incheon in what will be the third time South Korea hosts the competition. But to appreciate how far Korea has come in the Games, we take a look back at its history that dates back 60 years. Kwon So-ah has more.
Asia's biggest sporting event, the Asian Games, finally gets started on Friday in Korea's northwestern port city of Incheon. The history of the Asian Games dates back to 1951, when it was first hosted in New Delhi. 35 years later, the event came to South Korea for the first time when it was hosted by Seoul, followed by Busan in 2002. Incheon now becomes the third Korean city to have the honors. South Korea first participated in the Asian Games in 1954 in Manila, when it placed third in the overall medal count and has sent athletes to every event since. In 1970 in Bangkok, Korean swimmer Cho Ho-ryun began his rise to legendary status, winning gold in the 400 and 1500-meter freestyles. At the 8th Games in Bangkok, Korea's Kim Jin-ho won gold in archery, while Yang Jung-mo came out on top in wrestling. In 1981, Korea started preparing to host the 10th Asian Games in Seoul. Stadiums, accommodations, and new roads were built leading up to the event in 1986.
30억 아시아인이 공동의 번영과 우위를 약속하면서 아시아의 영원한 전진을 다짐한 아시아인의 축제가 열린 것입니다.
Team Korea thrived that year, breaking various world records and finishing second overall. Korea showed its superiority in male and female hockey, defeated China in table tennis, and swept up medals in all 12 weight classes of boxing.
동화가 꺼졌습니다. 우리는 해냈습니다.
Korea has grown into a powerful sports nation throughout the years and aims to prove it once again at the 2014 Incheon Asian Games, where the goal is to win at least 90 gold medals. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And with South Korea doing very well in the football tournament, a gold medal or two isn't out of the picture. Right now, it's the group stage and things are looking good. Both Koreas are through to the knockout stage, as are Palestine, Iraq, Indonesia, and Vietnam for the men, with 2 wins apiece for all those teams. An All-Korea final on October 2nd is possible if they can both make it through. Now it's the same for the women. South Korea is a lock with 2 wins, while North Korea, not far behind, has 1 win in their lone match. Now the group stages wrap up by Tuesday, the 23rd. And we'll be covering the Asian Games through the run, so please keep tuning in for that. Well, that wraps it up for me for now. Stay tuned for your weather updates up next.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Now, most regions began the day with a nice breeze before the mercury rose to the high 20s in the afternoon, except for Jeju, where light sporadic showers continue to fall. On Friday, the opening ceremony for the Asian Games will take place in Incheon under clear skies and moderate temperatures. Overall, Friday's weather looks to be absolutely perfect for spending time outdoors, but be aware as a big gap in temperatures from day to night will continue. Looking ahead to this weekend, you can expect warm autumn weather to stick around. On to Friday's readings. Seoul starts off the day at 15 degrees before rising to 29 in the afternoon. Daegu and Gwangju hit 28. On to other places. Daejeon makes it to 27, Jeju to 24, Dokdo 23, and Mangkumgang 27. That's all the updates for now. I'll see you again after midnight. Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's Primetime News on this Thursday. Thanks for watching. I'm Kang Chery.
And I'm Sean Lim. Come back for Late Night Edition, or we'll see you back here at the same time tomorrow. Good night.